What's up, boys? Last video, I started my goal of beating every endgame boss in Isaac without any items at all. I wanted to challenge myself while learning more about the parts of these fights that we often overlook. My expectations were instantly humbled by the first boss, Mom. After some minor theory crafting and experimentation, I finally got her down in a good run. It only seemed obvious that I should go for the next boss you unlock in the game, but this ended up being a much bigger challenge than I thought it was going to be. This boss is It Lives. It Lives is a bullet hell boss with a ton of waves of spawning enemies. Usually when you get to this point in the game, you'll have enough items where you'll skip most of the stages of this fight, but with the nerfs of this challenge, I got well acquainted with every possible wave. Since this battle occurs in the womb, every attack does double damage to Isaac, meaning I can only get hit twice before the next one kills me. This alone makes this fight an insane challenge. The boss has 3 stages to its fight. The first stage of the fight starts with eyes spawning in and the heart retreating to safety. You have to avoid the lasers of her eyes and kill them, and then the heart pops back into vulnerability. After the eyes, you can get some damage off, then she comes in with the next wave. These red hosts aren't too bad, but it's easy to get cornered or overwhelmed if they desynchronize their shots. Once they're dead, it's onto what makes this boss way harder than what most people would think. I'd wager that a lot of you didn't know that It Lives spawns bosses, but unfortunately it fucking does. The next wave is a polycephalus fight. Again, you have to finish the wave before continuing the real fight, and this is a tough one to deal with while the boss continuously shoots at you. This is even further complicated by champion spawns. Luckily, one version of the champion poly, the red one, is easier to deal with a more predictable attack pattern, but the other possibility is the blue champion poly, which spawns 2 of them. They have lower health but are much harder to avoid with the bullet hell happening around you, and will almost always kill a run. Luckily, this fight is made easier by the one saving grace of this boss. Her tears do damage to the enemies that she spawns. A lot of the waves can be made easier by getting space between you and the enemies and waiting for the heart's attacks to spin into them. Poly is big enough where if we lure it correctly, we can get all 4 shots from It Lives to hit the boss. Each of her shots do 7 damage, double Isaac's base damage, so this is a good way to get him down. I also experimented with using the bomb we start with to damage the heart and poly at the same time to make the fight easier, but focusing on that led to more mistakes on average and took time away from shooting It Lives, so for most runs I just bombed at the start. Now after the poly fight, 2 things can happen. If you played well and hit the heart enough times during her damage phases, you'll move on to stage 2 of the fight. If you didn't, she spawns the last boss of this first stage, Fistula. Any version of Fistula is a massive pain in the ass to deal with at this point, and can kill a good run. This is why I chose to use the bomb on this stage of the fight. You can't do enough damage to the boss as base Isaac to skip the Fistula fight unless you use it. Once the heart starts beating faster during your damage phase, you've hit the next stage. This stage has the same steps as the last one, but with different enemy spawns and faster attacks in her vulnerable phase. The first enemies of this stage are these knights. This is a welcome wave since it's an easier one. Most of the time, these guys just get themselves killed, but you still have to be careful because I started to get hit by them the more delirious I got from doing so many runs in a row. The second wave in stage 2 are these walking boils. It's another easier one to deal with, but they can also catch you lacking. Then comes the biggest hurdle in this fight in my opinion. It Lives spawns a teratoma, which is a floating segment separation boss that spawns spiders for each small part that's destroyed. This wave killed an unbelievable amount of my runs. I experimented with some manipulation, like only letting It Lives damage the boss so I could predict where the safest spot would be during the fight. But since It Lives slowly changes the trajectory of its shots, it seems to be random every time. After that hell of a fight, you get a Chub wave. This one isn't too bad, but she does spawn a lot of champion versions of him. Either way, some good path planning is enough to keep you safe for this part. That's the end of the stage 2 waves, but since my plan involved using a bomb early on, It Lives is usually still on this stage even after clearing those waves. Since we didn't do enough damage to her yet, she loops back to the beginning of this stage. Thank God the first 2 waves are easy, so if you make it past Chub, you can almost guarantee enough damage to kick her into stage 3 before a second teratoma fight. Stage 3 is where the fight gets real. Her attacks on her damage cycle get insanely fast and hard to avoid. She keeps attacking during her enemy waves, and these enemies are the hardest to keep track of. The first wave of this stage spawns 3 lumps that pop up and shoot you before retreating underground. Their attacks are fast as fuck and almost impossible to read. The next wave spawns 3 globins, which are actually pretty easy to deal with since Mom will usually beat the shit out of them with her attacks before they get overwhelming. Then 4 tumors spawn in, with often and rapid 4-way shots being slammed out. These are even harder to deal with than the lumps and take forever to kill. Then 4 hearts spawn with similar attacks to the tumors, but they also avoid you. Getting through this wave would take an insane amount of luck depending on what attack she decides to throw at you while dealing with the enemies that she spawns. At any point in this stage, she might decide to just start throwing out brimstone attacks instead. Honestly, this might be preferable to the enemies since you can constantly attack her and the brimstone shots are at least predictable, but that's not what ended up working for me. I experimented with the fight a lot to see if I could get any edge on her. After studying the ending for a while, I realized you can manipulate the last stage to force it to shorten into a single wave. When she's vulnerable during the enemy waves of stage 3 of the fight, she eventually runs out of shots and basically dry fires at you. Her attacks pause until the next wave, which I use to my advantage. The lumps from the first wave of this stage behave oddly when you're on the far side of a room, and keep a good amount of distance from Isaac. I realized I could keep one of the lumps alive and solely focus on avoiding their shots while damaging it lives. This allowed me to skip some of the most volatile and unmanageable parts of the fight with a much lower risk. Getting to this point was still an insane challenge. With around 10 hours of streaming attempts and 20 hours of offline attempts, this was one of the hardest challenges I have ever tried in a game. With my death counter at over 500, I was spending every free moment grinding this fight, and finally, I got this run. Alright! Going to the car is not as fun anymore. So clean! Oh my fuck! You need to stop. I have to go. Okay, we back, boys. Whew. Come on, third stage. Yup. Come on. Yup. 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 Oh my fucking god. Oh my fucking god. Oh my god. Let's go! Let's fucking go! Whoa! Oh my god. Oh my god, please tell me I'm recording. Oh. Massive thank you to everyone who watched the streams of this grind and helped me figure out the techniques I would use to beat it, and thanks to these guys for staying on the call with me during those streams so I want to go insane. I'm like 30 seconds away from being able to put mid-roll ads on this video, so I'll address some comments real quick. You can bring cards or pills since they're not items. I want to avoid using consumables unless I'm just not going to be able to beat a boss without them. Same thing for using other characters, that feels like a cop-out, so I'm going to stick with Isaac as long as possible. Delirium's got to be impossible. Fucking probably, we'll see. Now do Mausoleum Bomb? No. Also, I forgot to mention that It Lives does no contact damage, so that's interesting. Also, It Lives is harder than Mom's Heart, so that's why I fought it instead of the other way around. Okay, I think we're good. I never asked this, but subscribe please, I'm begging you.